I am Robert Kroese, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Robert Kroese.
I'd like to thank a few sponsors before we get into today's show, because it's those sponsors that allow us to keep bringing you shows day after day. The Son of Earp series by Chuck Buda, Shifters, Ghosts, and Demons, all set within the backdrop of the Old West. James Johnson, illegitimate son of the legendary Wyatt Earp, dreams of adventure and following in his daddy's footsteps. His mentally disabled friend Carson stands by his side. Together the friends wage war against evil. The Son of Earp series has it all. Supernatural forces are at work and the body count is rising. Can James and Carson save their cursed friend? Will they defeat the haunted gunslinger before more innocents die? Can James and Carson defeat the possessed before the demon hits the Chisholm Trail? Or will the devil win the West? Curse of the Ancients, Haunted Gunslinger, Summoner of Souls. The Son of Earp series is available in paperback, ebook, and audio formats exclusively from Amazon or free through Amazon Kindle Unlimited. Pick it up from Chuck Buda today. There's a link in the show notes. Mad Jones, Heretic by Quinn Hillier. Mad Jones Heretic delivers sharp satire on modern religion, politics, and media, all at the same time, along with insightful representations of the vagaries of today's celebrity culture and the lunacy of internet comment threads. Controversies surrounding race and sexual morality enter in as well. Additionally, its setting at the end of the 20th century in the midst of the Y2K computer scare provides the perfect vehicle to dissect millennialist themes as well. Mad Jones Heretic by Quinn Hillier. Thank you for listening. As always, stay tuned at the end of the show for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Now on to our interview. Essence, Book 1, Septima, the first volume in the exciting new science fiction series by Nick Breaker. Troy is no longer himself. Kidnapped by aliens infected with the essence of the dead General Tomas, Troy grasps at his only hope of survival. He merges his soul with the alien parasite trying to possess him, leaving him forever changed, and not entirely for the worse. Once plagued by crippling phobias, Troy is now fearless, willing to fight his enemies with his bare hands. But with his new strength also comes a new weakness: women. Tomas was notorious for his insatiable desires, and Troy finds himself constantly resisting temptation, especially the gorgeous, manipulative Alta. Although Alta has convinced the Pyrrhans she's helping them prepare to battle the murderous Reptarans, she's actually meticulously planning to steal their ultimate power source and then abandon them to their fate. Alta won't hesitate to kill anyone in her way, and her deep love for Tomas is Troy's only advantage. He convinces Alta that Tomas has taken full control of his being and thus keeps her trust and his life. While Alta schemes, Troy covertly struggles to save the Pyrrhans and prevent the Reptarans from invading Earth. But first he must wrest back control of his own soul. Essence, Book 1, Septima, the first volume in the exciting new science fiction series by Nick Breaker. Find it on Amazon today. There's a link in the show notes. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Robert Kroese on the show with me today. Robert has a brand new book that just came out on Amazon about a week or so ago, and it's called The Dream of the Iron Dragon. And the book is phenomenal. But there's a great story behind where this book came from. And I'm really excited to talk to Robert today about it. So welcome to the show, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
So I wrote a story in second grade that was about Captain Bill. I think I even had this on my Amazon bio for a while. Captain Bill and his spaceship, the Eagle. His ship wasn't the Eagle, it was the Eagle. because I thought when I was in second grade, I thought "the" was like a fancy way of saying the, saying the. So it was Captain Bill and his spaceship, the Eagle, and their adventures throughout the solar system, I guess. And we were assigned to write this story, and I think most kids wrote, a page or two or something, and then were glad to get on to something else. And I just wrote and wrote and wrote. And I went to my teacher and said, I kind of want to keep writing on this, but, do I need to do my math now? And she said, no, you just keep writing. So I said, this is awesome. I'm going to just keep writing and not do my other work. And I kept that up pretty much as long as I could, and this thing turned into a novel. I've been writing ever since.
That's awesome. So like the Eagle, like King James, the Eagle.
Right, exactly, the Eagle. Yeah. I thought that was fancy, it was like, that's more impressive.
Right, it is fancy. Yeah, I love to hear a story of a teacher that indulges a kid and, recognizes that there's something there. Maybe gift is a strong word, but some kids have a propensity to storytell and things like that. And there's always a person, in someone's story that recognize that, or at least indulge them, to let them kind of work on that. And that's awesome. I love that.
Yep. And I hope that still happens, like school is so regimented, these days. There's so much testing and everything that, I don't know if my teacher would be able to get away with that anymore these days, which is just kind of sad. But I mean, basically, I don't know how long this really went on, but it was enough that it made an impression on me that it was like, wow, you're really good at this. You should try that. And I just realized that I loved it. So yeah, she definitely gave me a chance. I dedicated my second novel to her, Mrs. Price at Ada Christian School. So
that's so awesome. So awesome. So in second grade, were you querying agents and
with the same level of success? Yeah.
Right. So were you a bookish kid? Did you read a lot?
Yeah. I read a lot, and a lot of sci-fi. The first sci-fi book that I remember, the real true science fiction book, was Heinlein's Red Planet, which is one of Heinlein's sort of, I guess they call it his juvenile. And it was just a fun adventure, and that had me hooked from that point on. My dad gave me a copy of that, and found it at a secondhand store or something, and I've been reading sci-fi ever since.
Yeah, mine was Have Spacesuit Will Travel. That Heinlein had that great run of books that just really, spoke to kids about our age, because I think I was I was between 4th and 5th grade, maybe, 9, 10, somewhere around there when I discovered that book, and my mind was blown. I'd already kind of been watching Star Trek, in syndication and stuff like that. And it just, it was all bets off from there.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was Star Wars, but I was never as much into Star Trek, but Star Wars came out when I was 7. And that was the other thing that was just like, wow, this is, it's just kind of like life didn't really even begin for me until I went to see Star Wars for the first time, and I was just like, that just kind of rewired my brain, I think, to some extent.
Yeah, I saw Star Wars in the first grade. I think let's see, it came out in 1977, so I was 6 years old, I guess. But my mom was a big Star Trek fan, and we would watch Star Trek reruns. And we would watch. I vividly remember I was a little kid, watching rocket launches on TV. Back when it was kind of a national pastime, and I vividly remember that. And then when Star Wars came out, yeah, it was it's like your brain turns inside out. Like this could be an adventure too. What the what the heck?
People, I think kids these days don't appreciate like how big a cultural shift that was with Star Wars in so many ways. It's just there's no explaining to someone what like having experienced life for a few years without that, and then Star Wars. I mean, that movie started the whole blockbuster thing, and with all these huge big budget sci-fi movies and the merchandising thing and so much, all these tie-ins, and besides the sci-fi aspect, there was just a cultural aspect to it that's like, it's very difficult to explain to somebody who didn't live through it. So I feel kind of blessed in that I had a few years, of consciousness, before Star Wars came along, and then that hit, and then I was just kind of like, wow, okay. So
yeah, another thing is, Robert, I think we're very close to the same age, but when I saw Star Wars, I remember vividly the next day going to school, or I think maybe I saw it at a drive-in. I think it was like at the end run, like it had been out for a while. But I remember when I saw it, I went to school the next day and everybody on the playground was playing like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and stuff. Yeah. And now when I take my kids to a movie, you can go home and immediately pull up film clips on YouTube, and you can kind of experience it over and over. It's like the experience never ends because we're just saturated with it. And we had to go to school and reimagine what we saw. And I don't know, it just seemed to really take root, because you had to depend on your memories and your experience so much.
Yeah, and there was this weird. I mean, it wasn't even like just Han Solo and Luke Skywalker. It was like Boba Fett and right. Admiral Akbar and all these characters, who were just like. And it seemed like there was instantly. It was like that was kind of our mythology. It's like we knew this stuff well as like the Greeks knew all the 100 different deities and stuff. It was somehow just got like there was this whole kind of cultural. Moment that kind of got downloaded into our brains, and we just constantly kind of reinforced this lore with each other, and we're correcting each other about who could do what and who was from where, and
who shot first.
Yeah, who shot first? Yes. Anyway, probably enough waxing. About Star Wars.
Exactly. Did you keep writing after the second grade?
I did. Yeah, I kept writing. Kind of in fits and starts. I wrote. I kept trying to write stories, and I never quite. Well, I wrote a lot of stories in junior high, just like silly and stuff, and then I didn't really start writing again seriously until I was in my I guess it was mid-30s, and I started this blog called Mattress Police, which sadly is not around anymore. But a few of my readers still remember that blog, where I would just write kind of these I don't know it's kind of like Dave Barry on acid kind of things with a sort of a sci-fi twist. It was just like very kind of surreal, like observational humor, but then sometimes just going just so over the top that it's just like what is this guy on? So that blog started to pick up some followers, and had kind of a sort of a fan base developing, and I was like, wow, I'm actually writing stuff and that people are enjoying to read. I should try my hand at writing a novel again, and I had tried that a few times in the past, when never really got anywhere, and I realized at that point maybe I should try using this humor thing that I seem to be able to do. And as kind of a crutch to compensate for the fact that I don't really know how to write a novel. And that's basically how Mercury Falls came about. I just started writing, and I was like, I'm not even going to really try to write a serious novel. I'm just going to like make a bunch of kind of humorous sketches and kind of make it as ridiculous as I can. And then eventually I kind of corralled it into a plot that does make sense. But that's how I started. Just sort of going off of what I knew, and gradually kind of learning how to write a novel.
During that time, blogging was a really great way to kind of get your feet wet and get some thoughts out there. And people would kind of cruise the blog, hosts and things like that. You could discover new writers. I'm really kind of sad that phase seems to really kind of be over. Social media has really kind of overtaken a lot of that, and there were a lot of great people that got their start by doing that.
Yeah, everything is Facebook and Twitter and Instagram stuff now. So yeah, the blogging really has gone by the wayside, which is it's kind of sad in a way. There was sort of a heyday, in the 90s and 2000s there, where there was a lot of people who found their audience that way.
Yeah. So tell me about Mercury Falls. What you had been blogging and kind of realizing that you had a gift at mixing sci-fi with humor and having a really unique outlook on it. What was the story idea there, and how did the writing of the novel go?
So what happened was that I'd been doing this blog for a while, for a couple of years, and I was. And it was a very irreverent kind of blog, and a very sarcastic and snarky and satirical. And at the same time, I had been selected to be a deacon in my church, and not only a deacon, but the treasurer of my church, which was I tried to tell them that was a very bad idea, that I should not be, I shouldn't be in any kind of, I shouldn't have any position of responsibility, and certainly not with money. My wife at the time wouldn't even, I couldn't even use the checkbook because I was so irresponsible. But they made me they were like, no, you know computers and stuff, so you'll be a good treasurer. And I was like, okay, I guess I can do this. And so then I was, on the one hand, trying to do this. I was being, I had this sort of snarky kind of alter ego line, and I was this sort of very serious, kind of respectable, member of the community on the other hand. And I was sort of trying to reconcile these things. And I had this idea sort of popped into my head of this angel named Mercury, who is kind of stuck between these two worlds, where he's honestly kind of a jerk. And he's very, short attention span, and very kind of anti-authority and snarky, and sarcastic, and just wants to do his own thing. But on the other hand, he's got this very, very important job because he's an angel, and at the moment he's helping out with the apocalypse. But he keeps getting distracted by things like beer and ping pong, and wanting to do his own thing. And so that's where it came from. And so then there's this whole story about the apocalypse, and the apocalypse gone wrong, and Mercury kind of reluctantly trying to straighten things out. That's how I got my start.
That's awesome. What did you do with the book when you finished with it?
So that was when self-publishing was like, Kindle was first starting to take off. And I had queried a few agents and gotten some interest. But I think I probably could have gotten it published by, a small press somewhere, but I really wanted to, if I was going to get a publisher, I wanted to have like a serious publishing deal. And I couldn't get enough interest in it that, I couldn't really get anybody to bite on it. So I said, and I was hearing stories about people like Conrath, J. Conrath, who's the guy, one of the first big kind of Kindle bestsellers. And I was like, and this was like, Kindle had been out now for like, a year or two, and a lot of people hadn't even heard of them yet. And ebooks were just not really a big thing. But I'd been hearing about, people having success with self-publishing, and I've always been kind of like, a do-it-myself kind of person, control freak. I wanted, let's get this done. Let's do it right. So I self-published it and did a bunch of promotion on my blog and offering, signed copies of my blog. And then as kind of an afterthought, I put this book up on the Amazon's Kindle platform. And my goal was originally to sell 1,000 copies of this thing. And between the paperbacks that I sold, on my website and on Amazon, and the Kindles I sold, I ended up selling something like 5,000 copies. So I was like, wow, this is way beyond what I thought I was going to be able to do. And then about 6 months after I got, I had released that book. And I was like, that was nice. That's about as much as I'm going to sell of that book, but that's fine. 5,000 copies is way more than I thought I was going to do. Out of the blue, I get this email from Amazon, somebody at Amazon, a guy named Terry Goodman, who was editor there. And he he says, I represent this publishing imprint of Amazon that's starting up, and we're looking for books to publish. I think we could help your book a larger audience. And I was kind of like, okay, this really, because at that point, nobody even knew that Amazon was in publishing. I had to Google it because I was like, well, Amazon doesn't have a publishing company. They do self-publishing, but they don't have their own. But it turned out they did. They were just getting started. And I was one of the people they kind of I got sort of swept up in this wave. And there were about 20 other people in the initial group who had just, self-published at the right time and got the attention of Amazon and got a big push from them. So Mercury Falls, long story short, they republished Mercury Falls. It came out about another 6 months or so later, the new version, and that one has sold something like 150,000 copies, I think.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
I know lots of traditionally published authors that are very successful that have not sold that many books.
Yeah, a lot of these, understand a lot of these are like, 99-cent copies, 99. They'll do the promotions. So it's not like I did a fair amount of money on it. It's all gone now, unfortunately. But but the great thing is that, that's 100,000 or so people who, that I got my book in front of. And that's just awesome. And that's really what you want. Authors in the past, Amazon doesn't get enough credit for this either. Authors in the past, generally made a very small percentage of the actual cover price in the book. Now they do quite a bit. On Kindle, you can make 70% of your of the purchase price, which is just amazing. Even if you put a book up on sale for $2.99, I think that's the lowest price they'll do the 70% at. You can make $2 per copy, which is as good as in the past you'd have made on a hardcover, or pretty close. So you can. I don't want to. It's a hard business. Don't get me wrong. It's hard to make money at this, but Amazon has really made it easier for people like me, both self-publishing and then their own publishing endeavor. So a little shout out to Amazon Publishing there and Amazon in general. Yeah, which I don't think gets enough credit.
Yeah, we talk a lot on this show about it's a great time for authors because you have the freedom to self-publish or to go with a traditional publisher or some sort of hybrid model, or and Amazon is this really interesting hybrid model of, they have their own publishing arm like you talked about, and it's a lot of work, and the industry has changed and is constantly changing. But traditionally published authors are having to work extra hard. Self-published authors are having to work extra hard. But there's more options. It's a great time to be doing it it's a whole lot better than working a real job.
Yeah, that's the thing is that the options are there. Options are freedom, and freedom is freedom. It's a good thing, but it's good. It could be good and it could be bad, right? You have the freedom to write a terrible book with an awful cover, upload it onto Amazon's KDP platform, and watch it die, or watch nobody buy it, or probably worse, it's even worse if nobody buys it than if some people buy it and give you terrible reviews. But that's not fun either. The freedom is there. The options are there. But man, it's still a tough business. You gotta make sure that your quality is top notch. And, as far as the writing quality and editing and cover design and all this stuff. And then you got to know how to market it to some extent. And that's a whole different thing, and it always it's changing all the time. So it's a tough business, but there's a lot of options there, and that's good and bad, because 20, 30 years ago, if you were writing a book, there was basically one way to do it. You would write a book and you'd get an agent and you'd get it published by a publisher, and then the publisher would handle pretty much everything. Unless they want you to do some kind of promo tour or something, and you could show up and sign books. But other than that, what were you as an author going to do? There was no social media or anything, so there wasn't any. You go on to write the next book, maybe do some interviews with newspapers or whatever. That's about it. Now there are 1,000 different things that you can do, writing and marketing and publicity wise, and just figuring out what to spend your time on is a huge kind of tactical decision that you have to make from day to day.
Right. Were you working on IT or software development when that first book kind of blew up?
Yeah, I was actually working at Google. I was working as a contractor at the Google headquarters in Mountain View. And yeah, it was so I'd been doing software development for about 10 years or so at that point, and I liked doing software development. It's kind of fun and creative and analytical. So it's good for my brain type, I guess. So I like doing that, but it was frustrating on kind of a political end. Like, for example, the project that I worked on at Google for 2 years, just died. I was there for 2 years and they said, "Oh, that's great. We love the work that you did. We're discontinuing it." So like I had basically done 2 years of work for nothing, which would have been really demoralizing. But then I had also written Mercury Falls at the same time. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to focus on this now. So I gradually, kind of when the first few books started to take off, I went from software development into writing full time.
I would love to talk about all of your books today. But let's do it. Let's just go from beginning to end. But you kind of made a niche, because you write these really great science fiction stories, but that don't take themselves quite so seriously. Starship, Grifters, the Rex Nilo adventures. Kind of, what are your thoughts on science fiction and the way you approach it?
Man, I don't know that I have any really like overarching thoughts about the genre, other than the fact that I write. I started writing originally to entertain myself. I just enjoyed it, and I tried to. There have been times when I've written some more serious books, and I enjoy that too. But that's more of a challenge. But when I was trying to get myself to write a novel, it's a huge commitment. It's a lot of work, any kind of novel that you write. And I just was like, I'm going to make this fun. I'm going to have fun. I'm like, I laugh and just surprised by what's happening on the next page. Then somebody somewhere will appreciate this. They'll think it's funny or ridiculous or whatever. They'll enjoy reading this. So that's all I did with books like Mercury Falls. Like I said, it was just like a series of kind of ridiculous, sort of almost comedy sketches that I kind of strung together in a novel. And then Starship Grifters was another one where I was like, it's kind of halfway between Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and then some of my other favorite books as I was when I was a kid were the Harry Harrison's Stainless Steel Rat books, which were this kind of sort of con man, grifter, thief actor who's this steel rat, and he can't be caught. And he I came up with this idea, this character Rex Nilo, who's just this ridiculously over the top kind of con man who has who's just a complete narcissist and has all the confidence in the world, and somehow always kind of ends up on top, but it has a lot of kind of ups and downs, and is almost sort of I based them actually partly on this is going way back, even way back before Star Wars, but there's a Marx Brothers movie called Duck Soup, where Groucho becomes like kind of in charge of this the defense of this country called Fredonia, and he's sort of conning them and like playing both sides against each other, and he's sort of being kind of being fooled by himself, by other people, and it's just this whole ridiculous farce, and that was part of the inspiration for Starship Grifters. I just wanted to take this ridiculous character and put him in this insane situation where he's kind of playing these sides against each other. And they just every page I was like, what's the most ridiculous thing that I can have happen on the next page here? What's the most unexpected, most terrible or wonderful or awful, thing that can happen on the next page? And I was just laughing my ass off when I was writing that book because I was having so much fun. So that's, my theory of those books, at least, is if I'm enjoying it, if I'm having a good time making myself laugh, then hopefully the readers will enjoy it.
I have been a lifelong science fiction fan, and genre fiction, just in general, so science fiction, fantasy, whatever. And, I often, lament the fact that science fiction is kind of turning very dystopian. And, in a lot of science fiction, there's a very grim outlook of the world. And, I like to talk about some of my first experiences and why science fiction excited me or gave me good feelings or, it was a fun experience for me. And, there's just not a lot of fun science fiction. There's a lot of military sci-fi and very serious stuff. And one thing I loved about your stuff is you kind of brought the fun back to science fiction. And of course we need serious stuff and, but there's also, sometimes you just really need to be entertained and to not take, everything quite so seriously. And, I love that you do that and you have a really, accessible, way of writing. You bring the reader in and, you can tell a great space adventure and laugh and have fun. That's obviously something that's very important to you because that's a theme that runs through a lot of your writing, isn't it?
Yeah. Laughing, making people laugh is a wonderful thing. To be serious about it. That's one of the best things in life. Really, unlike Conan now. What best in life? That's a wonderful thing. If you can put, just think about that. If you put a string of characters, symbols down on a piece of paper and put it in front of somebody, and you can have them just by taking that into their brain, they have this sort of endorphin rush and kind of involuntary, physical response where they're like, wow, that's interesting or different or something. That's a great thing to be able to do, to be able to evoke that almost primal kind of response. It makes people feel good, and I've gotten emails from people and reviews from people where they say, my brother was in the hospital, and I got one of your books to pass the time, and he was I was reading it aloud to him, and he was had tears coming down his face because he was laughing so hard, and I was just like, what could I do in life that is going to top that? That's like pretty much the best thing that you can do for somebody. It's hard to remember that sometimes when you're stuck in a room by yourself and you're just tapping away at the keyboard and you feel like, this is going nowhere. What am I doing? I'm just making up these stupid stories by myself and like nobody's going to want to read this. And then you hear something like that and you're like, wow, that's amazing. So it's a great thing.
It is. Before we move on to your brand new book and series that you're working on, tell me a little bit about The Big Sheep. This book to me is like if Philip K. Dick had Terry Pratchett as a writing partner.
Yeah, that's a pretty good. That's what I was aiming for, more or less. So that's good. Yeah, it's sort of so I had this idea. In sort of a roundabout way, I got connected with an agent about 3 years ago. David Fugate, who's my agent, and he, we were I was trying to figure out what to work on next, and we were sort of brainstorming, and I was shooting him these ideas, and he was saying, well, yeah, that's all right. That sounds okay, but I'm not sure about that. Or I'm not sure if that's your strong suit to write something like that, or if this kind of stuff isn't really selling right now. And I said, and I finally, after about the fifth idea, I said, well, I do have this kind of stupid idea that's in the back of my head, which is a book called The Big Sheep, which is a takeoff of The Big Sleep, with the Raymond Chandler novel, because mainly it was just a title, but I had also had kind of a vague idea that it would be sort of not a parody exactly, but sort of a reference to both Blade Runner, the movie, and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the Philip Dick novel that the movie is based on, of course. And he was like, well, that sounds great. And so I thought, okay, well, I got to take a stab at writing this thing. And so then I had some kind of ideas floating around in my head, and so I wrote a few chapters of it, and he said, oh, this is great. And so I wrote the rest of it. And it's very much, there's a lot of references, like to the point where I was kind of like just sneaking them in, like on every chapter. There's some reference either to Blade Runner or to Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and some of them are very subtle and some of them are not. So yeah, it's sort of a dystopian near future kind of noir story like Blade Runner, but the tone I was aiming for was more sort of like the BBC series Sherlock, where you have a lot of kind of sort of dry humor and this character who's kind of nuts but brilliant, and you never really know what he's like. Has he gone crazy, or is he actually figuring something out here? He seems like he's kind of acting like an insane person, but then you find out at the end of the chapter, oh, it all comes together. This is what he was really doing. So I have a sort of a Sherlock Holmes type misanthropic detective, and then his hapless partner who's along for the ride. So it's a lot of fun.
How much planning goes into your books before you get started with the actual writing?
I've found that I have to do. There's a certain level that I need to do where I have basically an outline, and I have an idea of what's going to happen. Like in every chapter, I may have a sentence or two for each chapter, and it's to call it an outline is a little bit is glorifying it a bit, but it's maybe 2 or 3 pages. Well, maybe a little more than that, but of just basically all the key plot points that I know I have to hit, and then the climax and the denouement. And then what happens? So once I have that kind of staked out, the sort of the map of this book, I start writing, and inevitably, what I find out is I completely change everything all around in the course of writing this, so that a lot of the plot points I end up replacing with other plot points. The climax ends up not being the climax, and it's almost a completely different book than what I had originally envisioned. But I find that it's important to have that map initially to go off of, so that you have something to kind of write toward, and you're not just kind of drifting. Even if it ends up not resembling that outline in any way. So I do, I usually do, I brainstorm for I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, and then I spend a few days or a week or so outlining, and then I dig in and start writing.
I think that experience is common for a lot of writers. That I don't think that a lot of people are strict plotters or pantsers. I think a lot of people have an idea of where they're going, but you may take some detours on the trip from beginning to end, and I think that's a pretty common experience for a lot of writers.
Yeah, and it's a good thing, I think, overall, because if you have an outline, usually those are the more I find, at least, if I'm not submerged in the process of writing, I'm looking at it kind of from more of a superficial kind of angle, and then these things that you think of that are like plot twists or whatever, they tend to be the more obvious kind of things. Once you get in there, you're like, oh, what if this person is really that, also this person, and what if this is the one who betrayed him, and that kind of stuff. And so once you get in there, then you can do really surprising things. So you have the outline, which is sort of like the kind of the obvious version of the book, and then you get in there, and then you twist things around, and you go, oh well, what if this is, you know, what other than what it seems to be? And so the outline is kind of the obvious superficial look at the book, and then you get into the actual writing, and then you make it into something more than that.
Let's talk about this new project that you've got. Dream of the Iron Dragon is the first book in a new trilogy. I'm trying to remember when I first heard about this or first saw it, maybe a couple months ago online or something. And the premise just absolutely kind of blew me away that nobody had thought to write the story yet. Tell us a little bit about kind of where the idea for this came from and when you knew that this was going to be something kind of epic.
You know, the crazy thing about this book, so the idea of the story is that these people from the future, the 23rd century, this spaceship crashes in Norway, Scandinavia, during the Middle Ages, during the 9th century. And by the way, there's a movie called Outlander with Jim Caviezel, which is a little similar to this, but mine goes in a completely different direction. So some people are like, "Oh, is this just like that movie?" Yes, it's kind of like that movie, but it goes way beyond that. So, this ship crashes. There's 4 people, and they're not going to detail the story. Basically, all of humanity, the future of humanity, and the human race rests on these people getting off of Earth. But their ship has crashed. So they're in the Middle Ages. They're in Norway in the Middle Ages. So they have no way of getting off of Earth. So the only way, but they have an unlimited amount of time, right? I mean, they're just stuck there. So what are they going to do? And they have the technological knowledge to build a spaceship, but it's obviously a huge undertaking to build a rocket, even in modern times. They don't, there's not the education, there's not the infrastructure, there's none of this stuff. I think at first they're just trying to survive, because they get, they show up and then immediately their ship is torn apart, and they want to, there's the king of Norway who's trying to take the ship, and there's the other people who are fighting against the king of Norway for their independence, and kind of middle of this. So anyway, the idea of the story was these people from the future get stuck in the past, in the Middle Ages, in Scandinavia, and they have to somehow figure out how to get off the planet, which involves this long project of eventually building a spaceship, which is the Iron Dragon. I'm not giving away too much because, obviously that's where the series is going, because that's the name of the story. But there's a lot that happens in the meantime, of the question of whether they even will survive and how this is going to happen and stuff. So yeah, and I knew it was going to be a huge story, and so then it's a trilogy, 3 books: Dream of the Iron Dragon, the Dawn of the Iron Dragon, and Voyage of the Iron Dragon. And the funny thing about this is this idea occurred to me even before I wrote Mercury Falls. So this was like 10 years ago that I came up with this, and I don't even know where it came from. I just thought, what would it take if you were stuck and you had all the technical knowledge to build a ship to get to space? You had like knowledge of physics and chemistry and metallurgy and everything else. So you have the knowledge, but you were stuck with these people who knew nothing, and you didn't have there's no, advanced technology. It's before the Industrial Revolution. There's no factories. There's nothing. What would it take to get to the point where you could actually build a spaceship to get off the planet? And it was such a daunting task that 10 years ago when I thought of it, I was like, I don't know how I would write this. I don't even know how to write a novel. So it was a long process, and it was something that's been in the back of my mind and kind of like daunting. Like, is this even possible to do? And finally I started, mentioning the idea as like a possible project, and people were like, "Are you serious? Like Vikings on a spaceship? That sounds awesome." So I was like, "Oh, okay." And that's the reaction I get anytime I mention it to somebody. It's like, "What? Seriously? Give me, here's my money. Where's the book?"
Yeah, it flips like every nerd switch that there is.
Right. Yeah, not to I don't want to toot my own horn here, but I go all out with Well, I mean, you've read it, but it's not. So one person described it as emotion meets timeline, Mike Crichton's timeline. So if you read The Martian or seen that movie, it's very much like that in the sense that it's like, okay, we're stuck here, but we have a lot of technical knowledge. How do we get out of this situation? And it's all action and all problem solving. There's not a lot of downtime in this book, and it's 400 pages long, and it's just pretty much action the whole way. So.
And speaking of timeline, read the book. Do not watch the atrocious movie. It's
I actually haven't seen the movie, so I don't.
Yeah, don't.
But it's a good kind of reference point.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You approach this project differently than you have in the past. You got a lot of excitement about it on the front end, but this book, I would imagine, required a lot of research that you had not probably had to do with some other stories that you've written. So how did you go about getting this project off the ground?
Well, boy, there's a lot of different angles I could take with this. Basically, so I did a Kickstarter, and this is going to sound very weird, but I needed some dental work done pretty badly. I'd been putting off some dental work for a while. And I had heard that people go to Hungary to get dental work done. Like I need a root canal and stuff. And people do this. There's this thing called dental tourism where people go to in Hungary is the big place in Europe. I guess in Budapest has more dentists per capita than anywhere in Europe, because everybody goes from the UK or wherever. Now I'm not saying anything about the teeth of the people in the UK, but they go from there or other places to Hungary to get their teeth fixed, and it's really cheap. And at the same time, I wanted to do a research trip to Iceland for this book. A lot of this book is going to take place in Iceland, and I always wanted to go and just to kind of experience that. So anyway, I did a Kickstarter, and as part of it, I was like, I'm going to take a research trip to Europe. And so I ended up doing this long, 6-week tour of Europe, where I went to Iceland first, spent a few days there, and then I went all over, and I ended up going not to Budapest. Well, I was in Budapest, but then I went from Budapest to Romania and ended up getting my dental work done in Romania. Spent 3 weeks in Transylvania, so I can say that I got dental work done in Transylvania. They didn't give me fangs, but I was thinking of asking for it, but I don't think they would appreciate that. They probably don't like those kind of jokes. So I incorporated this, made this a research / dental vacation, and went all over Europe. And I went to a lot of the places. Iceland. I didn't make it to Norway, but I did make it to Iceland for a few days, and I went all around. It's a small country, but I went all around, went to all the museums, and just kind of investigated the culture and everything like that, and saw all that stuff. And I went to Normandy, which is another big location in the book, and saw that area. Went all around there, and so then I had that kind of firsthand knowledge of a lot of these places in the book, and also got my teeth fixed.
Nice. A lot of the books that you write look forward to the future, and when you're writing in the future and out in space, there's a level of a freedom that the writer has to not have to get things precisely right, because you're imagining a world that does not yet exist. So you can world build and you can make things up just out of your head, and in the world that you create, they work and things like that. But with a book that is rooted in the future and the past, and you're dealing with the constraints of the real world and the real world as it existed hundreds of years ago. What were some of the challenges as a writer that came up in writing this project that never had before? Oh
man, there were a lot of them. where to begin? I mean, there's the first whole section of the book, the first quarter or third or so of the book, as you know, it takes place in the future. It's in space, and there's this big kind of chase between these two spaceships and stuff, because there's this whole background of this interstellar war and humanity being kind of on the brink of extinction. And there is a whole lot of if you want to do like serious, scientifically accurate space travel and like space combat, and one ship chasing another, or like, you know, another one, you know, catching a ship as they're entering orbit and around another planet, that kind of stuff. There's a ridiculous amount of physics and math, calculus involved in the orbital dynamics and stuff. So that was one whole area that I needed to get some help with, and I actually have an actual rocket scientist that I had her run over some of this stuff, and I mean, I fudged some of the numbers, you know. I mean, like I didn't do all the calculus and stuff, but basically it got past her. And she didn't find anything glaringly wrong. So I was like, okay, well that's good. And besides that, there was the whole, there's the historical angle. There's the language. These people are speaking Old Norse and Old English, neither of which I speak. So then there's that, where I was using Icelandic, because apparently Icelandic is actually very similar to Old Norse. It's the language has changed very little over the past 1,000 years, to the extent that if a Viking was transported to Iceland today, they'd be able to, he'd be able to speak to the people there more or less the way that like somebody from Shakespeare's time could talk to us. It's that similar. So I used Icelandic as kind of a placeholder for Old Norse, and then I had actually an Old Norse expert check my Norse to make sure that it was, and this is the kind of thing that 1 in 10,000 people are going to notice, But I was like, if you can go that extra step and make it actually Old Norse, then why not? So I had it so that he was very helpful, and then there's the historical stuff where I'm trying to figure out, how did the Vikings cook? Because there's a couple scenes where they, obviously they have to make food, and they basically didn't have any metal. They had metal, but it was very expensive, and so they used it for weapons, for spears, and for a few other things. But they didn't have like copper pots to cook in for the most part. And once you try to imagine cooking without using any metal at all, and you realize that it's a challenge, and
it's tough to make soup.
Yeah, it's tough to make anything. So you can cook on a spit, and there's a few other things that you can do, but stuff like that where you're like, it's one thing to read books. I mean, I read so many books about Norse culture and Vikings and stuff, and I went on this trip and I went to all these museums and all this stuff. But then when you are faced with a technical problem like that yourself, and you're just like, it comes out of nowhere, because you're like, okay, well then they sit down and they have a meal, and then you realize I have no idea how they're going to make this food, and you're going to spend 3 days, investigating, how are they making this food? What are the ingredients that they have? What's available, and how would they cook it? And so stuff like that, But you can't. You could cheat and make stuff up, but then that kind of that ruins the flavor of the book. To use a cooking. So I was pretty careful. I'm sure I made a mistake here and there, but I was pretty careful with all that stuff. So there was a lot of challenges, a lot of things. Oh, and then there was the whole chemistry aspect too. I spent like 3 days trying to figure out how to extract magnesium from seawater, which you'll see the importance of later in the book, why they need all this magnesium. But, stuff like that. And I had a chemist, go through this process and make sure that I could actually do this, and so I had, this chemistry, there's physics, there's calculus, there's history, there's language, linguistics, and all this stuff. So it was, definitely more of a challenge where my books, where I, Wikipedia is my friend, and that's about it.
Right. So the first book of the trilogy is out, Dream of the Iron Dragon. When would the other two volumes come out?
I am aiming for May of this year for the second one, which is the Dawn of the Iron Dragon, and then probably December for the third one, the final one.
Awesome. Robert, I know we could sit and talk all day about this, but I highly recommend everybody go pick up a copy of Dream of the Iron Dragon, and I'm looking forward to the other two volumes. If folks are not familiar with your work, where can they find you and get plugged into all that you do?
Well, my website is badnovelist.com. So they can go there, and otherwise you can look me up on all my stuff is on Amazon. That's the best place to find my books. I'm Kindle exclusive as far as ebooks. So if you're a Kindle reader, and all my stuff is on Kindle Unlimited, so you can, if you're in that, you can read it for free. So that's a good place to go. Or you can, and everything is available on paperback, and most of my books are available in audio as well. So Amazon, my name is Robert Kroese, Kroese. And I was going to mention that, A Dream of the Iron Dragon is out on Kindle right now, and in a few days, a week or so, probably the paperbacks will be available on Amazon. So that's not quite there yet, but it will be. I don't know when this is airing, so maybe let's say the beginning of February sometime, it will be. Paperback will be available.
What about audiobooks? Are you doing audio of these?
Yeah, audio will be coming in, let's see, I think we're aiming for probably April or May for the audio. So about the time that the second book comes out on Kindle, the first one will be out on audio.
Excellent. Robert Kroese, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Brian moved in closer, entering the rusty greenhouse through its eastern arch, keeping clear of the subject's line of sight. He pressed through the rose house, nothing but thorns, and into the grapery, nothing but vines. The meditation tones of the wind chimes were like fingers lipping crystal goblets. Two marble children hugged each other, swallowed by the swamp of a neglected fountain. Brian's shadow entered the palm house, the domed space at center, and the rest of him followed. Brian took aim at the figure's back and whistled. "Hands up there!" The figure waggled its shoulders a little, reaching for a weapon, maybe. "Did you hear me? Hands up! Now!" Brian circled the intruder. He took out his penlight and shone it in the man's face. "Shit!" Burlap and buttons. Just one of the stupid scarecrows. He thumbed his comm. "False alarm!" But Abby didn't reply. He'd lost signal. He slung his rifle back and put up his fists. He delivered a slow-motion punch to the scarecrow's head, an old potato sack with black lettering down one cheek. Its red button eyes were sewn on with plastic thread, maybe dental floss. The mouth was a bright red shoestring hot glued to the burlap. One end had shaken loose, so that the mouth drooped like a stroke victim's. Brian delivered a slow karate kick to its body, a business suit stuffed with hay. A stink rose. The guts were rotted. Only this one scarecrow had survived the storm. A couple dozen others had fallen face down in the mud of the palm house, strewn about like martyrs of some great scarecrow war. Motion caught his eye, and he frowned. A second scarecrow had survived the storm. He hadn't noticed it before, but he should have. This one wore a yellow hard hat and carried an axe. The hard hat was caked with mud, as if the scarecrow had been on the ground. Had someone righted it? Brian turned away from it, disturbed, and noticed a third scarecrow leaning against a nearby wall. This one wore a clown costume and mud-soaked rainbow hair. How the hell had he missed that one? He was an idiot. If that had been a person, they might have shot him in the head by now. He backed away from the trio of scarecrows. They reminded him of some Sunday school tableau. He was about to make his exit when a white face flew from the shadows. The hockey mask of Jason Voorhees, the machete-wielding psychopath of the Friday the 13th movies. The mask landed at Brian's feet and stared up at him. It was a dime store plastic thing, trailing a broken length of pink rubber band, with 2 sad hollows for eyes above an extruded nub of nose. The cheeks were pierced with little holes and bore 3 bloody streaks of war paint. Some poor scarecrow had lost its fright mask. Brian bent and picked it up, turned it in his hand, letting moonlight play across the concave interior face, creating that optical illusion where the gaze follows you. He lifted the mask, thinking of some childhood Halloween. When? Decades ago, when he'd been Jason Voorhees, stalking Sleepy Hollow, his tinfoil machete dripping Heinz 57. When did I get to be so old? People didn't appreciate the classic scares anymore, the old shock cuts and startle tricks. He made little panting horror flick sounds, ch-ch-ch, ah-ah, held the mask to his own face and looked through its cut-out eyes. "Trick or treat," he whispered. The answer was trick. A dozen scarecrows surrounded him. A dozen more writhed up from the mud. The eyeless corpse of Ferris the gate guard shrugged a hungry pecking crow and pounced.